Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines. Two Jordanian planes and one Emirati plane dropped 25 tons of humanitarian aid over the Gaza Strip today. The airdrops included food and essential supplies carried out by the Jordanian Armed Forces in partnership with the UAE. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has told the United Nations to stop blaming his government for the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, stating that secure routes have always existed and are now officially open. Quote, "There will be no more excuses," he said. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will meet US President Donald Trump on Sunday to finalise a trade deal aiming to end uncertainty for EU companies. Trump, currently in Scotland for Gulf and bilateral talks, praised von der Leyen as a highly respected leader. Islamic State-backed rebels killed 38 people in an attack on a church in eastern Congo, according to city officials. The assault in Komanda is believed to have been carried out by ADF rebels using guns and machetes. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke with the foreign ministers of Cambodia and Thailand, urging immediate de-escalation of tensions. The US offered to facilitate future talks to ensure peace and stability between the two countries. Thailand and Cambodia have agreed to allow Malaysia to act as a mediator in their broader conflict. Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen and acting Thai Prime Minister will arrive in Malaysia on Monday evening for talks, according to the Malaysian Foreign Minister. Ukrainian drones have targeted St. Petersburg today, forcing the airport to close for 5 hours as President Putin marked Russia's Navy Day. The city usually holds a large-scale Navy parade, but this year's event was cancelled due to security concerns. Turkish President Erdogan has commended French President Emmanuel Macron's decision to recognise Palestine as a state, calling it a courageous step towards justice. This move has sparked controversy among the Israeli and US leaders. Iran has executed 2 members of the banned Mujahideen-e-Khalq group for attacking civilian infrastructure. The death sentences were upheld by the Supreme Court, despite criticism over a grossly unfair trial from Amnesty International. Firefighters in Turkey continue to fight wildfires amid a searing Mediterranean heatwave, evacuating 3,600 people from affected areas, while fires in Mersin, Antalya and Usak provinces have been controlled. Flames in Bursa and Karabuk remain very much active. As the latest update in the ongoing US-EU trade talks, US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said that the European Union must open its markets to American exports if it wants to avoid a sweeping 30% tariff, set to effect by August the 1st. Speaking to Fox News today, Lutnick said the question is, do they offer President Trump a good enough deal that is worth it for him to step off the 30% tariffs that he has set? Let's take a listen in to his full comments.
Okay, so no extensions, no more grace periods. August 1st, the tariffs are set. They'll go into place. Customs will start collecting the money, and off we go. Obviously, after August 1st, people can still talk to President Trump. I mean, he's always willing to listen. And between now and then, I think the president's going to talk to a lot of people. Whether they can make him happy is another question, but the president's definitely willing to negotiate and talk to the big economies for sure. Europe needs to make a deal and wants to make a deal, and they are flying to Scotland to make a deal with President Trump.
Especially the younger generation very much care about TikTok not going away.
I mean, the president really likes TikTok, and he said it over and over again because, you know, it was a good way to communicate.
He added that President Trump is pushing to expand access for US businesses and sees a 50-50 shot in reaching an agreement with the European Union. Lutnick emphasised that while Brussels appears eager for a deal, the final decision will rest with Trump. Talks between the EU and the US are still ongoing, with key sticking points including auto tariffs and broader market access. We're now joined by Dr. Ajay Jua. He's a former Secretary of Commerce and senior economist. Thank you very much, Dr. Jua, for joining us on the programme, as always. As the US approaches a decision on an imposing 30% tariff on the European Union, how do you assess the economic implications for both sides? And what would such a tariff mean for the broader global trade landscape?
Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Pleasure.
A 30% tariff, which is likely to kick off on the 1st of August if there's no agreement entered in between the US and the EU by that date, is going to be, I think, too high. Too high for the exporters of EU and too high for the consumers of these products in the United States. As you know, over $600 billion of exports took place from the US, from the European Union to the US last year. And the exports from the US in turn were 370, which means $236 billion of more trade, kind of a trade deficit of the US. So yes, by 30% levy of it, bringing in 30% duty, the deficit might come down, but the costs of these products would also go up in the United States. So what has been agreed to so far by President Ursula von der Leyen and the member nations of the EU was a 15% tariff on, instead of the current level, a flat 15% tariff on the European goods going into the US, but exemptions on the transportation sector, broadly consisting of aviation, aviation parts, etc., and willingness to pay some amount of duty on automobile and automobile components going from the US. At the same time, EU had sought exemption on several spirits which go from Europe to the EU, on machinery, as well as pharmaceuticals.
Dr. Jua, I hope you don't mind me interrupting you, apologies, but Howard Lutnick's statement implies that the European Union must open its markets to American exports to avoid this tariff. From an economic standpoint, how likely is the European Union to make significant concessions here?
I think the canvas is between 15 and 30%. 15% they have agreed to. The United States is threatening to get back to 30%, which it had imposed earlier, but was stayed. I think 2 or 3% more is probably the maximum, which would be optimum. I say optimum because the US is looking at it from the point of view of revenue. The European countries are looking at it in terms of competitiveness of other exporters, exporting nations, including China, and the scope for exports for them would come down. Not that the US is going to consume less in the short run, but in the long run, even that would get affected if the duty levels remain very high. So I think prudence and kind of moderation on both the sides is needed. And I say on both the sides specifically because President Trump has two causes of, so to say, complain against the EU. Number one, that it's the United States which has been bearing the cost of defending the US, defending the European Union through the NATO by and large, and the states are spending less the member states are spending less, and second, of a huge trade deficit of over $200 billion, which the US has, and he would like to bridge that. So I think a rational approach, accepting 15 to 20% duty,
Yes.
might be the answer or the way forward.
Dr. Ajay Jua, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Pleasure having you. We now move on now and over to the Middle East, where Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is pushing back against global criticism over Gaza's humanitarian crisis, urging the United Nations to stop blaming his government. During a visit to an airbase, Netanyahu said Israel has opened official secure routes for aid, adding there will be no more excuses. Meanwhile, the World Food Programme says it has enough supplies en route to feed all of Gaza for nearly 3 months and hopes the new humanitarian pauses will allow a surge in food deliveries. On the other hand, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz spoke to Netanyahu by phone, urging him to deliver aid immediately and to work towards an immediate ceasefire, calling the humanitarian situation in Gaza catastrophic. We're now joined by Keith Vaz, who is a former UK minister. He joins us live from London. Keith, pleasure to have you on the programme as always. Keith, a huge day in regard to developments here coming out of this region. Benjamin Netanyahu has told the UN now that to stop blaming his government for the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. How much do you think of that? How much do you think is for the reason that Israel is letting in aid here? Is because of all the photos we've seen coming out of the Gaza Strip? Is because of all these Western governments adding increased pressure on its ally?
Good afternoon, Thomas from London. Well, let's see. The only reason why Benjamin Netanyahu has said this is because of the international condemnation as to the actions that he and his government has taken to stop aid going into Gaza. So he's not doing everyone a big favor. He is actually listening for the first time to public opinion and to the opinion of his allies, because all these governments, the Germans, the British, the French, and everyone else, they've been supporting Israel. So when your closest allies start turning against you, you have to do something. It is a catastrophe what's happening. Thousands of people, men, women, and children have died. Let us see what the result of what he is doing has on the people of Gaza. This should always have been an operation run by the UN. This should never have been an operation controlled by the Israeli government. So as well as saying, don't blame us, which is the way in which Israel normally deals with these situations, I think what he has to do is hand over the mechanics, the operation of what is going on, to the UN. That is the best way of proceeding in this very, very agonizingly difficult situation. I don't think anyone who has seen the footage on television of what is happening in Gaza can feel anything but absolute shame that it's taken so long for the Israeli government to act. But I think it's right that governments such as the Germans, the British, the French are moving swiftly to say to Israel, you better stop and you better let the aid in. Now it should be up to the UN to run this.
Keith, that follows quite well into my next question. How do you view the international community's, mainly Western allies' response to this to this crisis? You mentioned that the UK have acted swiftly there. A lot of people would disagree with you in that statement. Do you think that they have perhaps been too late? How have you assessed how Israel's closest allies in the West have reacted to the photos we've all seen, to the reports from the UN? How do you analyse this?
Well, I apologize to your viewers and to you, Thomas, if it makes if I have been interpreted as saying they acted quickly. No. They've acted quickly once they've seen these pictures. They have not acted quickly in the last year to try and come to some kind of an arrangement. A ceasefire could have been arranged if the members of the Security Council, and that includes Britain and France, acted more swiftly to make sure that something has been done. So the speed is only because of the footage, not because they could have done this much earlier, much earlier. So many people have died because of the failure of the international community to act. And I'm afraid the United Nations has proved to be an organization that just cannot operate, whether it's here in the Middle East, whether it's Thailand versus Cambodia. This is what the UN was supposed to be doing. That's why it was supposed to be set up, to try and stop catastrophes of this kind. So I'm glad everyone is now putting pressure on the Israeli government. It should have been done much sooner. I can remember the statement of my own Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, when he said that Israel was entitled to react in any way they could in self-defense. This was 2 years ago. This is way above what self-defense is. This is allowing the killing of innocent people. And that is why it is essential that the ceasefire happens, that the gates are opened, and that aid is allowed to get in immediately, not under the control of the Israeli government, but under the control of the UN. The UN is the only organization that should be deputed to deal with this situation. All these governments that have supported Israel over the last 2 years should realize that they should have acted sooner. And at least let's see what's going to happen. I'm afraid, as with most of the things in the Middle East, we do have to wait and see what happens before judging how honorable the Israeli government is going to be. I hope they will be honorable, what they've said, but let us see what happens over the next 24 hours, because the people of Gaza are right at the end. They cannot wait beyond 24 hours.
Keith Vaz, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure to have you on the programme, as always. We now move over to Europe next, where Russian President Vladimir Putin emphasised the critical role of the Navy in safeguarding Russia's security and sovereignty during Navy Day celebrations in St. Petersburg. He highlighted the ongoing July storm manoeuvres, which involve over 150 ships and 15,000 personnel across multiple seas, aimed at simulating complex combat scenarios. Putin also stressed that these exercises incorporate lessons from Russia's special military operation in Ukraine. He confirmed ongoing efforts to equip the Navy with advanced technology and improve combat readiness, including the transformation of 5 Marine Corps brigades into divisions to enhance the Navy's strike power. We're now joined by Mark Sutherland, who is a geopolitical commentator. He joins us live from London to discuss this. Mark, thank you very much for joining us. Mark, President Putin's comments on the critical role of Russia's Navy in safeguarding the country's security, they're significant. How do you interpret his emphasis on the Russian Navy's strategic importance, given these events are occurring?
It's extremely important, and remember that I think it was 2017 that he then brought back the Navy Day celebration and being able to address the Navy and then basically show off the particular ships and Navy that the Russian have since the Soviet Union. This is extremely important within the conflict that is going on, because as we know, we think we know, but information then comes. It's how we get hold of that information, e.g. to find out where various submarines, etc., are underwater in various parts of the world in that theater of war, including, it would then include between the West and the East. So this is very, very important. Putin, I think, like all of us, there is a lot we are concerned about how the reaction from leaders, what buttons would people push. He has then got pressure from home that maybe they're not being very honest or clear about. The same within Ukraine, as we've said, we want this whole thing to end. But this is an opportunity for Putin to flex muscles again, just to say, this is the navy that we have, this is the resources that we have, even though they have then cancelled this Navy Day celebration today because they are concerned, they have security issues that they are then concerned about.
Mark, this day is quite grand. However, we hear that Russia constantly has sanctions imposed upon it, and is an outlier in the current geopolitical climate. However, this goes to show that Russia certainly does still have muscles, as you put it. What does this military parade show about Moscow's economic state, its military capabilities?
As you've said, this is an occasion for the Russians to then show their military capabilities, what they have, what ships they have, etc. It is always a signal to its enemies. This is saying, well, don't push us. We have actually got this. It's extreme. At times, it's an extremely difficult minefield, Thomas, to go through, because there are concerns about the economic strains of this war on the economy of Russia. How long have they got within the war chest before they are running out of money and turning to this? We're also very aware of the awful killings on both sides, the amount of casualties, etc. But as you and I have discussed before with the whole BRICS nations, e.g., this is a case of flexing. No, we know what's going on. We need to then actually stand by the people that are standing by us to say that we are going to see things through. We are a military power. This is their words. This is what they're showing, to say that we are not to be trifled with. You and I need hours and hours to sit down and go through much history on this issue, Thomas.
Yes, Mark, indeed. But we do come to a close on that and move over to the continent of Africa for our next story, where Islamic State-backed rebels killed 38 people in an attack on a church in eastern Congo on Sunday. The assault took place in Komanda, a city in the northeastern Democratic Republic of Congo, where ADF rebels armed with guns and machetes stormed a Catholic church during a night mass. Local officials reported that 38 people were killed, 15 were injured, and several others remain missing. Human rights activist Christopher Moyanduru, who was present at the scene, said the victims were mainly Christians targeted in the church, with some killed by machetes and others by gunfire. The United Nations has condemned the recent surge in violence in the region. We're once again joined by Mark Sutherland to discuss this further. Mark, what does this terrible attack on this Catholic church in Komanda tell us about the current state of security in the Democratic Republic of Congo?
I think these events are just awful, and this is extremely tragic. What it says is that you and I, like the rest of the world, we have to pay far more attention to what is happening in this incredible, within our Africa, in this great continent. We have to pay attention. I think it's extremely sad. And again, what it rises, we have to look at ISIS, you have to look at their ideology. I believe, if I've got my history right, that they were pushed out of Uganda when the Uganda military then came against them, and then they went into the Congo. It shows us that in various regions that stability, security is not secure whatsoever, and we all have a responsibility to keep an eye on that and to do whatever we can to end the tragedies like this. But it's an ideology. We go through other parts of Africa where you look at Islamic militias against Christian militias who have then come together to then defend themselves. This is the tragedy of this behavior and what is then escalating in various parts of the African continent. It's something, as Thomas, as you say, what does this do for security? It raises that we have to keep an eye and work out how we can then end, as I say, tragedies like this that are happening too regularly. We only have to look at what's happening in Nigeria as well.
Yes, indeed. Mark, will stay in the region for our next update. More than 2 years of armed conflict in Sudan have severely damaged the country's infrastructure, causing widespread power shortages that continue to affect daily life. Despite recent improvements in security across central regions, essential services such as electricity, water and gas have yet to recover fully. In the capital of Khartoum, the largest oil refinery remains closed after repeated attacks, leading to critical fuel shortages that hamper electricity generation. Residents face prolonged blackouts, with Port Sudan experiencing outages exceeding 10 hours daily, and Khartoum enduring up to 16 hours without power. These shortages have disrupted water supply, forcing many to rely on unsafe sources, contributing to health risks. Locals say that despite the cessation of fighting, the ongoing power crisis continues to hinder recovery and prevents displaced families from returning home. Mark, this power crisis in Sudan has been going on for more than 2 years after a cessation of fighting. How has this conflict affected the country's infrastructure and daily life?
Again, it's a tragedy. I think if we look at Sudan, that maybe 12 million people have been displaced. If we then go back in history, when you've had one coup, then you have another coup. This goes back to, I think, the man Bashir then coming into power around about 1989, then an overthrow of his government a number of years later. Again, it's understanding history, power play. And very sadly, civilians are then caught in the middle of this, because the UN and various other people that are looking at this have said, well, there's a genocide going on, or slightly pulled back from that in actually confirming that. I think there's been 150,000 plus civilian deaths. You and I both know that if you then are cutting off water supply, other infrastructure, that you are aiming to disturb that and actually dealing then with the armed forces or the other opposition that you are wish to then fighting against. Civilians are then caught in the middle of this all the time. It's one way very quickly that you can turn the country into utter chaos. Hence the reports of going, the 12 million people have been on the move through the years of this conflict.
Yes, Mark Sutherland, thank you so much for your insight on that issue and the other updates. We will now move on once again and stay in the continent. In a significant step towards peace, rebels in the Central African Republic have begun laying down arms after a peace deal was signed in April. Members of the Union for Peace in the Central African Republic, or the UPC, and the Return, Reclamation and Rehabilitation Group, known as 3R, are now surrendering weapons in a government-led disarmament process. The agreement signed in N'Djamena formulates the dissolution of both groups. Over 170 former combatants have been demobilized at sites in Malom and Kau, with more than 150 weapons collected. The African Union and UN mission MINUSCA have welcomed this development, calling on remaining armed factions to follow suit and embrace the peace process. Now let's take a look at some updates from the Indo-Pacific. Australia has signed a 50-year defence treaty with Britain to strengthen their cooperation under the AUKUS submarine pact. The agreement, signed in Geelong, covers the design, build and maintenance of nuclear-powered submarines to counter China's influence in the Indo-Pacific. Britain says the deal could be worth up to £20 billion in exports over the next 25 years. Torrential rains has forced the evacuation of over 3,000 residents in Beijing's Miyun district, where a red alert, China's highest weather warning, was issued. Average rainfall reached 73.5 millimetres, with peak levels topping 315 millimetres at Huang Tulian Station. Authorities have activated a level 1 flood emergency response, closing 12 major roads, though most have reopened. Rescue teams have reached all 149 affected villages. No fatalities have so far been reported, and evacuations remain underway. Thousands of Malaysians took to the streets of Kuala Lumpur demanding Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's resignation amid growing public frustration over soaring living costs and broken reform promises. Chanting "Step down, Anwar," protesters gathered at Independence Square, with police estimating at least 18,000 in attendance. Anwar, who came to power in 2022 on a reformist platform, has faced backlash over tax hikes and subsidy changes. However, he responded with cash handouts and promises to reduce fuel prices to ease the pressure. Hundreds of Indonesian protesters gathered outside the US Embassy demanding action over the growing hunger crisis in Gaza. Waving Palestinian flags and banging pots, protesters called for humanitarian aid and political pressure on Israel. Meanwhile, Israel announced a daily pause in military operations in parts of Gaza and opened new aid corridors. Aid from Egypt also began moving into the enclave following months of global outcry over the crisis. Well, that is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.